especially in India's intervention in helping out Sri Lanka, as we all been said, that is what the India does. There's obviously, and that's quite rightly, it is. I mean, it's India has its own agenda, and I think because what matters to India more than anything else when it comes to Sri Lanka, one thing is actually the Sri Lanka's. If you go to the past, the history of Sri Lanka, the colonialism came to Sri Lanka not because what we had inside the country. Colonialism came to Sri Lanka because we were close to India. We are geographically located in a place which is very close to India. And we are geographically located in an area very close to the sea routes. That is crucial for any colonial power who are aiming to rule India. So we are close to the sea routes and we are close to India. So in that geographical sense, we are close to these two things. That was the reason Sri Lanka was colonized in the first place. And Sri Lanka has the longest colonial history in the South Asia. Like more than 400 years, Sri Lanka has remained as a colony, except a couple of kingdoms, which also fell to the British in 1815. So the reason I said that was in Sri Lanka's geographical proximity to India determines the internal politics of Sri Lanka. It has always determined the internal politics of Sri Lanka. So when J.R. Jayawardena came to power in 1977, Sri Lanka became one of the first two countries in the world to adopt an open economic system. One is Chile and the second is Sri Lanka. And so Sri Lanka was a kind of testing ground for many of these kind of Western kind of interventions in economic terms, in political terms, in geostrategic terms. Sri Lanka has always been a kind of experimental ground. It's like a lab in the Indian Ocean. So India normally and naturally, India has a concern about this. And that's why India also always get involved in Sri Lanka, because they are concerned about their national, what they call as national security. So in my opinion, I think even though India's southern border is Point Kanyakumari, in reality, they consider the southern tip of Sri Lanka is their southern border, even though they don't admit it. This is my opinion, because I think whatever that enters beyond the southern tip of Sri Lanka poses a threat to Indian national sovereignty and Indian national frontiers, in the opinion of Indian policymakers, in my opinion. So therefore, when the Chinese get involved, when the Americans get involved, when the other external powers get involved, India worries about it. And India basically, that's one of the reasons during the 2009 war, what you saw in Sri Lanka is a unique situation, I would say a unique configuration, where all kind of countries supporting one party of the conflict. Now, everywhere in the world, if you take Syria, if you take Libya, if you take Palestine, if you take Ukraine, the world opinion is divided between different parties. But in Sri Lanka, Indians back the Sri Lankan state, the Chinese back the Sri Lankan state, the US, the Israelis, the Iranians, the Pakistanis, and Europe, they all back the Sri Lankan state. And the reason was actually, it's not that they have become friends, but they all wanted to keep the others out. India wants to keep the Chinese out, so they back the Sri Lankan state. And Chinese did the same. The Pakistanis did the same. The Americans and the most of the countries did the same. And the state benefited out of it, while the Tamils stood at the receiving end. So in that sense, in my belief, I think India's intervention at the moment, what we see as India's reaching out to Sri Lanka, helping them, providing them money, fuel, and all these things, obviously has a clear agenda, like any other country in the world. I think no other country would do it for altruistic purposes. And they want to keep their traditional enemies out. And they don't want to let Sri Lanka fall into the power orbit of someone else. So therefore, I think India, all these things that you said, the comrade said about Adani's involvement and other stuff, I think they all play a role. I think India's investment will increase, India's political presence will increase, India's grip on the Sri Lankan state, and the lever. I mean, India will have another lever now to exert pressure on the Sri Lankan state, and which we could see in the coming months and years. India has basically reconfigured or pushed the reset button in their relationship with the Sri Lankan state. And that is what actually happening, in my opinion.